Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap-Up. I'm Joe Sanriego, and with me we have Kobe Lambert from Grid Tonight and Ben Schneider from Grid Encore and NASCAR.info. A big weekend, chaotic race weekend right before the Olympic kickoff break. And a big thank you to our Patreon investors, calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network. Robin, highlighted in gold. She doubled her amount she's investing each and every month. Encourage you to invest in us. Link in the video description. You can also do a one-time investment through YouTube Super Chat right here, or buy me a coffee. Get your name on the leaderboard. The simplest way to support us, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and be sure to visit our website, Grid Network TV. Matthew Rowe will have all the latest articles regarding the NASCAR Cup Series, and Ben will start with the NASCAR Cup Series, which I got to ask you before we even get into race, what's going on with NBC? I understand when there's major news breaking, you got to cover the news. Programming plans change, regardless of if it's related to motorsports, other events, major breaking news, that takes precedent. But one thing I'm starting to get a little bit tired of is this pairing of IndyCar and NASCAR, and when there's a delay, it just impacts the day. For example, when NASCAR had delays, impacted the Laguna Seca coverage a few weeks ago. Last weekend, Iowa Pocono. This weekend, IndyCar. The delays of the cautions, after cautions, a red flag. By the time that race ended, it was the second stage of the Brickyard 400, the two races overlapping, and on the channel not advertised because of the breaking news. So some viewers missing out, some viewers have to be choosing one of the races to follow. Is NBC dropping the ball on motorsport fans who follow both series?
Well, I also think it's important to note in context that was your typical in a criminal justice system Law and Order reruns that were on USA Today, while the IndyCar race was on a streaming service with, I don't know, maybe they'll get 50,000 viewers, who knows? Yeah, very, very frustrating time to be a motorsports fan this time of year. And I have to say, I think I have my doubts, I have my concerns. I want to make that very clear. Fox Sports has a lot of issues, but week by week, I'm feeling more optimistic about IndyCar in 2025. And and I don't even know if it's an NBC thing individually. I think it's more of a fact that monopolies are not good, and especially from 2015 to 2017, I guess, when ESPN took over the F1 rights the following year in 2018. I mean, it was even worse a few years ago. You had the same network this time of year covering NASCAR races and IndyCar races and Formula One races. Now, fortunately, you still had NBCSN at the time, so you had a channel that it made sense to put motorsports on. But even then, I remember there would be some mornings where the F1 race was occasionally on CNBC because NBCSN was showing Premier League soccer matches or whatever, or the IndyCar race would have to get bumped to CNBC because big NBC was showing something else and NBCSN have a NASCAR race. So NBC has always, I feel like, had this issue where they have too much programming and not enough places to show it. But I'll tell you what, I know our friend Matthew Owens today said that this was a fitting end to perhaps NBC's worst broadcast ever. I'm not going to go that far. I still stand by Nashville last year. 2023 was NBC's all-time worst, and the absolute fawning over them that we saw on the Twitter timeline is still one of the craziest things I've ever seen. I think it's just proof that everybody's so Fox fatigued because NBC didn't even come on the air until after they had fired the engines last year in Nashville. So it was a very low bar that this race had to clear. I do think the race was shaping up to be a typical average NBC broadcast. I didn't have too many issues with it. I have an issue, obviously, with what happened at the end of the race, and I think we'll get into that here in just a moment. But biggest problem for me, probably Rick Allen saying that Dale Jarrett started the tradition of parking the car on the bricks in 1996. And I know my editor-in-chief, Brock Beard, was asking the same thing, just like, how in the world do you get that wrong? So, look, nothing personal against Rick Allen. I've never met him. I'm sure he's a very nice person. But I'm very much looking forward to Lee Diffie coming in the NASCAR Cup booth, and I'll leave it there. But I think we have to talk about what happened at the end of the race, because I think that even more justifiably leaves a lot of fans with a sour taste in their mouths.
Well, quick follow-up to that. You mentioned about the end of the race. For some fans, they didn't get to see it because USA Network, they had to raise NBC. Some of the West Coast viewers were vocal that they didn't get to see it. Essentially, you have what a lot of folks call a crown jewel race bumped off for local programming, whatever issues going on. Does NASCAR need to talk to NBC about one of their bigger races being bumped off?
Yeah, and I got some replies to my tweet saying, it is a big news day. Obviously, I think everybody knows by now that the presumptive Democratic nominee for president, Joe Biden, has dropped out of the race. But we got that news. I mean, the pre-race got preempted because of that, because that's when the news actually broke. I don't know that following up on that story 4 hours later with a bunch of news anchors at your local NBC affiliate discussing, what this means and all that. That's what we got here in Boston, at least. I heard some people were saying they just got local paid programming, because maybe I think the West Coast probably was in that boat here. So it'd be one thing if it was like more breaking news to follow up on, and it was like NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt coming on in a national massive sort of deal. Like, okay, I understand standards and practices, you're going to cut to that. And I also understand, I'm sure there are some local religious viewers of the local 6 o'clock news that would be annoyed if a car race was overrunning. I mean, I get that it goes both ways, but at the same time, this is allegedly a crown jewel race. We'll get into that in a little bit later in the segment as well, Joe. But 30th anniversary of the Brickyard 400, yeah, it's a big deal, and I don't appreciate the fact that it got bumped over to USA. Now, I will say this though about getting bumped to USA: if we'd started the race at 1 p.m. and if we'd limited ourselves to one overtime attempt, I don't think we would have had this problem either. So there are multiple solutions to this, and we can decide which ones would be most beneficial to us as a series and to us as a fan base. But yeah, just overall, not a very good deal here. Again, I see Matthew's in the chat here, Joe. I don't know if you want to bring his comment up, but again, I don't know, but I'm going to go quite as far as you, Matthew. I thought the broadcast coverage, like, of course, I saw your tweet about sticking on a rear end onboard camera during a side by side, and then what's the point of a side by side? Like, there are certainly things I could nitpick. I didn't think it was terrible by any means until we got to the finish. So if you're saying it's the worst NBC broadcast as a whole ever, I disagree with that, but I certainly can't disagree with it being their worst finish of all time, because just the mess from a network change to whatever Rick Allen was saying as Kyle Larson was doing his burnout or whatever, that was certainly a mess. But I don't know. And Alex, look, I get your frustration. I don't love that we're starting with this either. I wish we could be talking about an amazing three-way finish between Keselowski, Blaney, and Larson that went green all the way to the end, and I think that would be a much more positive discussion and a great way to bring the Brickyard 400 back. Unfortunately, that's not what we got, so we have to talk about this here, and certainly in agreement with your second comment there. Maybe this is partly on IndyCar too. I kind of forgot that the race was going on today. I guess they weren't too enthusiastic to advertise it, considering they stuck it on a streaming service, and they're of course losing the IndyCar rights next year. But we'll save that for the next segment. I know we still have plenty to talk about in terms of how this race actually finished, so we can move on there.
And I gotta say, I wish we had to finish. He just talked about where it was a three-way battle to the 400 mile of the race between those three, but unfortunately, the NASCAR race, some would say fortunately, because Kyle Busch hit the wall, so that brought on a caution, that brought up overtime. Fuel became an even bigger factor. Keselowski had to surrender the lead right as they're about to take the restart, so he pulled into pit road. Kyle Larson moves up. Ryan Blaney was furious, just thinking that should not be the case, that he just gets to go up there. That put essentially Larson towards the front. Caution for that big crash on the front stretch with John Hunter Nemechek, Alex Bowman, a couple others out. Then the final restart, Ryan Preece, who got in that crash that essentially ruined William Byron's day. He spins, blows the tires. He's sitting there, and we were wondering what's going to happen. What's going to happen? The white flag came out. Then the caution flag came out. A lot of folks did not like that. A lot of folks thinking, why did y'all wait to throw that caution? Waited for that caution flag. Instead, you could have had another time. Do you think NASCAR should have thrown that caution sooner for Preece?
Yeah, they should have thrown it as soon as it was obvious he had a flat and he wasn't going to get going. I mean, and listen, people know where I stand on overtime, but if if we've made our bed, this is how we're going to do things. So this is how we're going to call races. The fans demand agreement. I mean, Mike Bagley put that poll out after Nashville. 3/4 roughly of NASCAR fans wanted something other than 0, 1, or 2 to 4. They wanted unlimited, which in that case, according to that poll, would mean the 5 or more that we got in Nashville. So as much as I think the finish of that race was a farce, as much as I think the finish of this race was a farce today, the majority of NASCAR fans have shown that they want a green flag finish by whatever means, whatever cost possible. And when that's the situation that we have, these are the rules that everybody understands it to be. I mean, you saw the fix was in. You saw NASCAR, treating HMS and Larson as the golden boy. I mean, I'm not putting the tinfoil hat on, but a lot of fans were, and that's never a good thing for NASCAR to have to deal with. And even you can talk about conspiracies all you want. I mean, I think certainly fans of drivers not named Kyle Larson have a right to be frustrated with how the race played out, because they did wait for him to take the white flag for something that needed to be a caution earlier. And it was a callback to what happened in 2017 when we had the overtime line, and NASCAR clearly waited because they just wanted to finish the race and they're running up against darkness here. We weren't doing that here in 2024. We have plenty. I mean, I can look out the window right now. I'm to the east of Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There's still a decent amount of daylight out. I don't know what the sunset time officially is here, but I mean, they could still be attempting to finish the race right now as we speak, for all we care, if we have truly unlimited attempts. So I don't understand why. I mean, it seemed like NASCAR held that caution back because they were fed up and wanted to finish the race like they were in 2017 at the Brickyard, like they were at the Truck Series finale at Phoenix last year. And I don't understand that at all. So again, my preference would have been the race ends under caution. Brad Keselowski, and Brad even tweeted this, wins the Brickyard 400, which he did. Congratulations to him on that. Congratulations to Kyle Larson as well on winning the Brickyard 417.5. So that of course is my preference. My preference within the realistic world that we live in would be you get one attempt, and I don't care if you wreck in turn one. I don't care if you wreck coming to take the green flag. If the pace car pulls into the pits, that's an attempt. Whatever happens after that, if the condition on the racetrack is unsafe enough that it warrants a caution, you throw that caution as soon as you would if that happens on lap 52, and that's your one attempt, and that's it. We call it a day, and we pack up, we go home. So I don't know if NASCAR is going to revisit that. I think the results of the poll are self-explanatory there. But to answer the question, I have no idea at all why they waited until Larson crossed the white flag, until he really got through turns 1 and 2 to throw the caution for Priest, because it was clear he was never going to get going again. And, I know who's watching Brock Beard's stream as well. He's suggested maybe bringing back some variation of the racing back to the start-finish line rule again. If NASCAR wants to bring something like that back, I think that would have been safe to do here at this track. We can revisit how we want to police that if it happens at a short track like Bristol, Martinsville, or New Hampshire, which is why, of course, they scrapped that rule 20 years ago. But in this particular instance, at a track big enough like Indianapolis, again, that's something that I would take over whatever it is we got today, because I think there's a sour taste in a lot of fans' mouths. And for this to be the return of the Brickyard 430th anniversary, it's very unfortunate.
Unfortunate way for the race to end. Couple of comments in the chat room as they're coming in. Race control needs to be very much close to that. While I don't believe in the NASCAR rig theory, I definitely believe they are so much generous with the teams. One of the big things I got to say is this race, I think, got a lot of people talking just because there was a reminder of what happened the year before, a few years ago, the last time we ran this race, with that overtime line that was in the backstretch. Seth Eves. Olympic breaks, probably perfect time for NASCAR and its fans. Also need to be harsher penalties for running yourself out of gas on the restart line. That's a pretty interesting suggestion there.
That could get a little, I don't know. I don't know how you can realistically police that in a consistent manner. I think we have too many rules as it is.
One thing, back to the question about the caution coming out earlier, I feel if NASCAR had said, look, time constraints, this is going to be our last attempt, that would have been a lot more fair, a lot more clear communication. Because like you said, there's still daylight. We've seen this race go longer. I'm curious if just a situation of the race is now on USA Network, which I think is still more Law and Order reruns, so I don't think it was a big priority to get off the air. But I would, if I was a fan, it's like, okay, we know these cars, there's flat tires. You're most likely going to need a caution to get them out. Even if Ryan Priest kept going with those flat tires, he'll be so slow. They would have easily caught up to him on the backstretch, entering turn three, made a lot worse situation. So I just had no idea what NASCAR was doing. And then the caution comes out. So I can understand why I think a lot of folks feel like this finish essentially ruined the race. So overall, I do like this idea you mentioned, Ben, about the potential racing back to the finish, particularly in the big tracks. They could have, okay, we got a car spinning. NASCAR just tells everyone on the radio, racing back to the line. That could have been a simple solution. The only thing I would get concerned about would the drivers just start pushing regardlessly somebody out of the way, especially in a big track like Talladega, where you're in the big pack, you block, you push. That's the only concern I have. But that is something I think a lot of fans might be talking about. And I'm hoping NASCAR looks into this during the Olympic break, because overtime has become increasingly a hot topic, it seems, with the unlimited attempts, what happened at Nashville, the race over to the USA Network. We had at a track with no lights, and I don't think anybody just bringing the idea lights at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, that's going to be another debate. And maybe NASCAR was just ready to say, let's just end this race before it gets more crazy. Does NASCAR use this Olympic break to reevaluate the overtime limits and maybe introduce some ideas like, okay, you're racing to the finish under these scenarios?
Well, I don't expect them to. And again, I think that, to NASCAR's credit, fans wanted this race back in the oval. I've got a very cynical view of this whole situation and NASCAR's relationship with IMS after how this race ended. But, I think NASCAR has shown that they have been receptive to the fans. And unfortunately for people like me, NASCAR fans have made their voice very clear that they still want unlimited attempts despite all of this craziness and insanity. So I don't expect them to revisit it. But I will end it on this. You bring up the 2017 Brickyard 400. I can't remember if that was the last race or if it was one of the last races, but I remember that being the catalyst for scrapping the overtime line and saying the overtime line is now going to be the start-finish line, coming back to the white flag like how it used to be. And I think that, again, I'm not a fan of overtime in principle, but I think that improved the rule rather than the status quo at the time and leading to a finish like we saw 7 years ago. So I think it is definitely worth revisiting. Do I think they're going to do it? No. But does historical precedent show that there might be an opportunity for them to take this time away and look at the rule? I suppose maybe there is. So maybe there's some hope in that regard.
It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the overtime break. I would only imagine they'll probably be looking at some ways to improve things here and there. They may not address it to the public. I don't think anything major will change. And if they do, they'll tell us, and that'll be something for discussion. I do, in a way, hope that if per race they just announce, like, okay, we're going to overtime, just a heads up, everybody, we could go unlimited overtime if needed. Or in a case like today, hey, we're going to overtime, but we're only going to give 3 attempts because whatever factors, just so that way the fans know, the teams know. It's not just, why aren't you throwing the caution? What's going on? The white flag comes out. Now there's a caution. And now you got all these unhappy fans. So I'm hoping NASCAR looks at some way of better communicating with everybody. I think that'll just make it where you have a lot less upset folks. Of course, Kyle Larson, he's not upset. He won this race. 4 wins this year. We know it's a matter of he could go out there and win races, Ben. But it just seems like several times he crashes out of races. The inconsistency is not there. I'm pretty confident he's going to have a deep playoff run. But do you think Kyle Larson to be one step above everybody else, because he just broke away from the other drivers with 3 wins? Does he need to improve his consistency in the big picture for the championship?
Well, I don't know. I just pulled up his results here. I guess his 3 races prior to this win at Indy were an 8th at Nashville, 39th at Chicago, and a 13th at Pocono. Yeah, I don't know if that's good enough to get you out of the round of 8. Maybe it is if he's banked playoff points, and he certainly has banked plenty of those now with 4 wins here. But I mean, I can look at it again and say, look, he is leading the regular season championship with missing a race. He missed the Coke 600, of course, because he was doing the Indy 500 and couldn't get back in time because of the weather. So, if you're leading the points despite missing a race, I don't know. It's very hard for me to tell you to start doing anything different or find something to improve on. Because if you can improve on something, clearly everybody else below you in the standings can as well. Because if you've got room for improvement and you're leading the points, then there's nobody in the field that doesn't have room for improvement. So, Larson with 4 wins, a handful of other top 5s and top 10 finishes. I think that it's been a very solid year for him. Of course, you can always try to cut back on the mistakes or the setbacks. And I'm sure he would love to be going out and nodding a top 10 finish every week if he can't go out there and park it in victory lane. But I don't know. It's hard for me to critique him too much given how much positive momentum that he does have at this moment.
He has a positive momentum. I just feel like sometimes with Kyle Larson, he'll win. We think, okay, he's going to go on a tear. He's going to get win after win after. No, that doesn't happen. He has a crash here, crash there. 13th, not bad finish, but we also know, I believe he had a penalty in Pocono, correct, that derailed his race, his potential chance of contending for a win. So I feel if that team could just figure out something to where, okay, they get into the playoffs, they don't have these scenarios of they win the first race in the first round, they're in the second round, but then they have one bad race, then there's just 2 poor races later, they're out of the playoffs. I feel that's where that team is sort of just missing a little bit. It's going to be really interesting to see what that team can do after the Olympic break. And of course, once we're finished with this Olympic break, 4 races remaining in the regular season. We have 4 winless drivers in the playoffs. So right now, a win and you're in. That's not going to be a case of more than 16 different winners. Still, some of these drivers, Ty Gibbs comes to mind with Joe Gibbs Racing, 2311. Bubba Wallace had a good day. Front Row Motorsports, Todd Gillian, another phenomenal run. Which team do you think is going to need this break the most?
Yeah, well, Ty Gibbs certainly comes to mind. 2 weeks in a row where he's dealing with an engine problem. Certainly not a great result for him there. And again, Brock was talking about this on his stream before we came on with ours here. I don't know if they're just testing different setups or different engine modes or whatever to prepare for a playoff run, but they got to get into the playoffs first. And they got to put Ty in position to go out and win races and fight for a championship if that's their ultimate goal. So, maybe they need that reset. But I'll tell you what, Joe, I think the ones that need the Olympic break most are the fans because the timeline after the finish of this race, I think, certainly showed a heightened amount of frustration among the fan base here. And I just want to say one more thing here before we move on to IndyCar. I'm going to have to take a couple of days to gather my thoughts here. A couple of years ago, I did an op-ed for Brock, talking about how NASCAR's relationship with Indianapolis seemed to be at a crossroads. And I said, we've either got to bring back the oval race, bring back the Brickyard 400, which we've done now, or we leave the facility entirely. And it pains me to say this because I think we were on track for a pretty good race with a fantastic finish. But if the so-called best drivers in the world cannot behave themselves for 2 laps at the finish or at the end of a race, and it leads to a spectacle like this with decisions from race control like we saw today that leave fans fuming at the end of the race, then we are not giving the racing capital of the world the respect that it commands. And to be quite frank, we shouldn't be at the racing capital of the world. And the Bristol Night Race should be considered the 4th crown jewel. That's just my opinion. That's where I'm at. That's where I was at towards the end of the Brickyard 400's initial run because I felt like the event had lost its luster. I was excited to see it come back today. I still think it is very much preferred to turning left and right on the infield road course. I'm very glad that if we're going to be there where we seem to be committed to the oval once again. I thought we got a great Xfinity race. Of course, we'll have more on that on the Encore show tomorrow. But I still think the Xfinity car should be at IRP. That is where, I would prefer that series to be at alongside Trucks and ARCA. And NASCAR, again, if they're going to be at IMS, I think they should be running the oval. But if it's going to end in a clown show like this, then I'm sorry. I feel like I don't know how this race can justify crown jewel status. I mean, they took the race away for 3 years, for crying out loud. So I don't. It's very frustrating for me just sitting back as a race fan watching this and watching the reaction to it and how it all played out. And I don't think that all this is, this particular race today's fault or IMS's fault or whatever. It's just it leaves a very sour taste in my mouth as a race fan. The finish to this race that we got today, it's incredibly frustrating, and I think a lot of fans feel the same way about it. So I think to answer the question about who needs the Olympic break, the fans need the Olympic break just as much as drivers and teams do. I think if there were ever a year we were looking forward to it, this is certainly it.
Olympic break is just in perfect time. It's interesting because yesterday I was asked a question about the crown jewel status of this race, and I said, I feel it's more so for the drivers, because the drivers, for them to say, I wanted the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, especially the oval, where the only other race that takes place on this oval is the Indy 500, means a huge amount to every driver that wins there. We did see an improvement in the crowd. Today's race, though, I do think just leaves everyone with a bad taste, and just going to be really interesting. Will that carry over to next year? With a decent crowd, will that improve next year? It's going to be really interesting to see how this all shapes up with NASCAR and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. From Alex, I think that this win locks Martin Truex Jr. into the playoffs, and he is safe. Eyes has to be on Trackhouse as who needs to break the most. They have looked out of it this month. Very true. I think Trackhouse Racing, Suarez, Chastain still winless. Truex Jr. is like over 100 points above the cut line. So as long as he doesn't have a disastrous race, he had a rough go today, he should be safe. Ross Chastain, though, he needs to step it up. I think that would be a huge disappointment if that team, especially Ross Chastain, misses the playoffs. Now, of course, NASCAR, that wasn't the only series we had racing. We also had the NTT INDYCAR Series running as well. We'll bring Cody back in for the IndyCar Series recap.
All right, thank you, Joe, and welcome back, Kobe. Let's talk about the IndyCar Series on the streets of Toronto. And viewers may remember one of our roundtables at the start of the year. We had a couple of hot takes from our colleagues. Jackson Lambros said that he thought Will Power was maybe getting up there and might be the weak link at Penske. Alex said that he thought it was Colton Herta and Andretti that might be the weak link. We dubbed it the Battle of Mid. Well, now both of those drivers have wins this year. Colton Herta getting the job done today. Unstoppable on the streets of Toronto, leading every session, getting the job done, and now putting himself in a position to potentially contend for the championship. But this was the last street course race of the year. We still have Portland coming up, but that is the last road course race of the year. And if you look at Colton Herta's history, oval's not his strong suit compared to how he's performed on road courses in the past. So, Kobe, with that in mind, Herta is 57 points behind Palou in the championship. Did he end his winless streak too late in the season, especially considering how the ovals are stacked towards the end, to make a late season charge for this championship?
Well, given the unpredictability of the NTT INDYCAR Series, I'm going to say that anything is possible right now. I'd actually bet on Alex Palou's still the front runner and favorite to win this championship, but really, who knows with a couple of short ovals and then Nashville to end the season and Portland in between all of that. I really think it's anybody's game up there in the top five in the point standings. But good for Colton Herta. It's been a long time since Colton Herta has had this type of weekend where he was fastest in practice, fastest in qualifying, and then absolutely dominated this race. I know Kyle Kirkwood challenged him all race long, and it was very close on the racetrack, but Colton Herta was clearly in control of this entire race weekend. And this is the type of weekend, that we look at Colton Herta and say, this guy could be a future Formula One driver. In recent years, Colton Herta, he's really struggled a lot, and he hasn't been able to put it all together. He's shown speed here and there. He'll get a pole position. He'll look very fast, seem like the races fall into his laps, and then something happens and it falls completely apart. But this is the first time in a while where Colton Herta put together a full race weekend. I think that's something that this number 26 Gamebridge Andretti Global team can be extremely proud about. And to answer your question, I don't think it's necessarily too late in the season for Colton Herta to end his winless streak, but I certainly think it's going to be a huge boost of morale for that number 26 team. It'll be interesting to see what he does down the stretch here. It could potentially give him a lot of momentum, and we could see Colton Herta, getting multiple podiums to close out the season. We'll have to see where the points lie after that.
I'm curious to see how Colton Herta performs, because that momentum, as you said, Kobe, that'll be huge for the team. Go out there and run your best races, and don't push yourself to where you make a mistake and crash. I think will be key for Colton Herta to maintain that momentum. If he has a positive finish, a positive race weekend at Gateway, has some of that momentum for Portland. We know he likes that track. He calls it an old school track. If he could go out there, have another strong run, podium, win, carry that momentum over to the Milwaukee Mile, he could have a good, solid run. He has this momentum. He has this confidence. It's just a matter of racing smarter the next few race weekends. That means just a top 5 at Gateway. Hey, take that for what it is. It's a great effort by the team, yourself. You carry that over to Portland. You carry that over from Portland to the Ovals to close out the season. He could put himself in a good run, in a good position in the points. I wouldn't focus too much on the points. Palou, I mean, it's no big deal that Palou is pretty much at a point where he could finish last and maybe one person could tie him, but don't focus on that. Just focus on carrying this momentum for the remainder of the season.
Well, let's keep it on the title challenge discussion right here. Let's talk about Pato O'Ward a little bit. Joe, I know yesterday on the pre-race show you discussed if his momentum from the Mid-Ohio win was potentially starting to die off and losing steam. He had a rough qualifying session, and obviously the race ended with a very frightening accident. Power and Palou have since pulled ahead further in the point standings here. So, Joe, I'll go to you first for this. Is Pato O'Ward's championship contending hopes over unless the top 2 have bad luck?
Mathematically, they're not over yet, but I just feel like this team, it just never really has been to that point where you could expect consistent finish after consistent finish up there all the time. He'll have good races here and there. We thought Mid-Ohio, we saw the full potential of this team. Can they carry it over? Well, they did in Iowa, second place that first race. The third race didn't exactly go their way. And then this weekend, not at all a good weekend at all. And I think this is the kind of thing we sort of anticipate. McLaren just seems to be a little bit behind the Chip Ganassi's, the Team Penske's, when it comes to executing a perfect race weekend. So it's really disappointing for Pato O'Ward, his fans, the McLaren team. I feel like this is just sort of like what we've seen from this team before. Crashing out. Thankfully, Pato O'Ward was okay, but still, this is just, I think he needs bad luck from the top 2 if he wants a shot at the championship and just try to run flawless races. He has more ovals. That's the help for him, but he does need to step it up, them and that McLaren organization.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think Pato O'Ward's championship hopes are over, because if you look at the schedule coming up, I think, with it being oval heavy, I think it really favors him, because Pato O'Ward is a very strong oval racer. And I think if he can stay out of trouble, get those podium finishes, be nice and consistent down the stretch, and maybe have some of the other front runners running into trouble, I think Pato O'Ward can potentially keep himself right in the thick of it. But yeah, he can't afford to have many days like he had today at Toronto. I have a feeling if he has another poor finish with the DNF and a hard crash like this, I think it's certainly going to be very hard for Pato O'Ward to overcome this. And yeah, that was certainly quite a scary crash we say with Pato O'Ward, and then his teammate Nolan Siegel also piled in to that, and really happy to see Santino Ferrucci is okay as well after getting airborne and then the bottom of the car smacking the catch fence and then upside down. That was a very scary crash that brought out the red flag. But the day was definitely not a banner day for Arrow McLaren, with O'Ward and Siegel getting taken out in that crash, and then also we know the situation with the number 7 Alexander Rossi breaking his thumb in the practice crash, and then Teo Porchera, after everything the team and that driver have been through, returning to drive for Arrow McLaren, something that we never would have expected. Yeah, so all in all, not a great weekend for Pato Ward and the entire Arrow McLaren team.
Well, at the top of the standings, Alex Palou kept most of his lead, actually extended his lead over Will Power with a strong fourth-place finish. But Power wasn't the only one from Team Penske that had issues today. Last week's two winners, Power and McLaughlin, collided with each other. Newgarden had a punctured tire from avoiding McLaughlin's car. So it's not Penske perfect, but they'll likely be ready for Gateway coming up next in the schedule. So, Kobe, as we approach this break here, which drivers and teams are looking forward, riding some positive momentum, and then which drivers and teams are slipping down the order and need to regroup?
I think heading into this mini break we have coming up, I think Chip Ganassi Racing's Scott Dixon and Alex Palou are obviously the ones who are very excited to be heading into the break. But unfortunately, qualifying didn't really go as well for Palou yesterday, so he started outside the top 15 and ended up driving that car into the top 5. And I thought that was a very good day for Alex Palou, considering, because you don't really expect someone to move up that far up the grid to get into the top 5 after having such a poor qualifying session. So I felt like he salvaged what he could out of this day. And, Scott Dixon things also had a really good points day. And I think Colton Herta with the dominant weekend he had is also really looking forward to get it going, is also going to be happy heading into this break. And just like I just said, he can possibly build some momentum. And we just talked about it in some drivers and teams, not, that really need to reevaluate things heading into the break and slipping down. Pato Ward, Arrow McLaren, already said what I had to say about them. And also, I think Scott McLaughlin's going to need some time to cool off as well, because it really seemed like that he was really putting himself into a championship picture, and then to be taken up by his teammate Will Power like that, who just put him in the wall. And you saw Scott McLaughlin got out of the car, was not happy, and he waited on Will Power before getting into the safety truck, and as Will were by, he did this number. Good job, Will. Nice job doing that to a teammate. So I'm sure Team Penske is going to have those two talk it out and move on from this, because the last thing you don't want to see is having teammates get into it like that.
I think with this break coming up, some of the teams that are probably feeling good entering the break has to be Alex Palou, Scott Dixon. As he said, what an effort by Dim after a disastrous qualifying. Colton Herta, Kyle Kirkwood, they have to both be feeling good, and especially it's been a while since we've seen those two exactly up towards the front. What an effort by those two. If they could have success in the next few races, that'll be great. Team Penske, I'm pretty confident that they're going to get everything settled between Will Power and Scott McLaughlin. Scott McLaughlin has to remind himself he has having a great season. He has had races where he has been the fastest car. Nobody could beat him. Very much likely Portland is a track where he could really rebound. Let's see what you do at Gateway. You got that oval win already this year. Those are two good opportunities for Scott McLaughlin. For the driver sliding, one driver I'm sort of thinking about is Christian Lundgaard. I just feel like since the news have come out about him leaving, we're not seeing anything. This was the race he won at last year. Nothing to really show. So that's been one issue. Agustin Canapino, I think with all the issues going around with that team and everything going on, then a tough break today. He's probably looking forward to this break to just regroup, refocus. But I don't know if the ovals might be a challenge for him and the remainder schedule. So overall, I think the break is just a welcome opportunity for some of these teams, but for some, they just need to regroup because they've been struggling.
All right, we'll leave it there. Certainly still a lot to look forward to in the IndyCar season, but we'll get back to it after the Olympic break here. I think everybody across multiple different series looking forward to a couple of weeks off here. But for Formula E, we're going to have several months off because they ran their championship race today. And Kobe, I'll hand it over to you as we recap the season finale for season 10.
Yeah, Formula E just can't let us have an off season this year, can they? Yeah, starting a new season at the very end of 2024. Season 10 concluded today at the ABBFI Formula E World Championship. So that's in the books. Pascal Wehrlein from Porsche is the world champion this year after a disastrous final race weekend for Jaguar in London. Both Jaguar drivers, Mitch Evans and Nick Cassidy, were first and second, leading up to the second attack mode for Cassidy, who ended up falling to third, and then he made contact with Max Gunther, so it was game over for Nick Cassidy, and that was his championship down the drain right after that. Mitch Evans forgot to arm the attack mode and lost position to Verline. Jaguar appeared to have no control or any idea of how to handle the race. And I even posed on our own private chat earlier today, is Jaguar the Ferrari of Formula E? Because they seem to be completely lost and totally dropped the ball this week. And I'm going to start off with you, Joe. Did Jaguar and Nick Cassidy basically choke away this driver's championship?
Yes, they did. And I just feel this is not just a one-time, okay, the pressure from Portland got to you. You got to remember what happened to Nick Cassidy last year. He won at Portland. He was entering London as the potential favorite for that championship. Race 1 ruined him. He had that meltdown on the radio. Here we go again. This time, Portland, first race, 2 laps ago, 3 corners away from ending that lap. He spins off the grass. He was not in the mood. He didn't show up to the driver media bullpen afterwards, so nobody could talk to him. Second race in Portland, not good. Then this race, he puts it on pole, and I was starting to think, this is the Nick Cassidy everybody's been waiting for, the one that's almost unbeatable. This is just something where Jaguar could have easily said, okay, we're going to let you 2 race, but here's the plan when it comes to attack mode. And we did not see that. Mitch Evans kept everyone so bunched up that I was saying to Josh during the watch along that he is going to allow somebody to challenge Nick Cassidy, because once that happens, that gap is bigger and he could lose the position while getting attack mode and stay ahead. Jaguar really dropped the ball on this. They should have been on top of it much better. Why didn't they do this prior to the race? Because we knew entering the race weekend, they had the advantage. Race 1, Pascal Wehrlein, he took the lead. This has sort of been their opportunity to regroup. I just felt like they just sort of said, we'll just let the race play out. We're not going to have a plan. And Nick Cassidy, he is the kind of driver I feel he needs a team to be supported. He needs a team to have the plan. You cannot just rely on him to go out there because, again, this year, he was telling the Jaguar teams, you guys need to apologize to me, but you won't publicly apologize to me. I just couldn't believe it. I feel like we're seeing him just having another meltdown. His season had just fallen apart after Portland. Mitch Evans, as long as he's been with Jaguar, he always seems to be a championship contender, and forgetting to arm the attack mode, I just cannot believe he did that. That essentially handed it to Pascal Wehrlein. Jaguar, what a disaster. The thought that they won the team championship, James wanted to celebrate, but the 2 drivers did not want to deal with him. That was a big message.
Yeah, Joe, reminded me of Mercedes winning the Constructors' Championship at Abu Dhabi in 2021. Nobody was in a mood to celebrate that because, of course, all the prestige is with the Drivers' Championship. So the finish of this race, while perhaps not as dramatic or earth-shattering as that one was, certainly had to leave Jaguar with feeling like there wasn't too much to celebrate after what happened to Cassidy and Evans there. And I see our own Nicole Fry saying, so sad to see the championship slip away from Cassidy. And yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add to what Joe said. And again, I know enough to cover Formula E at a more basic level. I know who all the big names and drivers and teams are. I don't know as much about the history behind James Barkley, the team principal. I'm sure Joe will fill us in on that here in just a bit. But anytime you're getting compared to choking wins and championships away like Ferrari is in Formula One and being called the Ferrari of another series here, I think that is a pretty self-explanatory comparison that's being made. So, yeah, an unfortunate deal for them, and unfortunate in particular for Mitch Evans. I think this is, the 4th year in a row, but he's gone into the championship race or the championship doubleheader, at least, with a mathematical shot at winning it, and still comes up short. So an unfortunate deal for them. But as Kobe said, there's always next year, and we don't even have to wait till next year. They're coming back at the end of this year in December.
Yeah, for sure. And we know with this short off season, won't be a lot of time for Jaguar to make any changes if they truly believe that there need to be changes. But yeah, I'm actually really stunned that Nick Cassidy and Jaguar threw away this drivers' championship. I thought he was in the catbird seat, and all they had to do was remain consistent, and stay out of trouble, and he would have been perfectly fine, as it seemed. But as we know in motorsports, you wait until the very last minute to see how these things are going to unfold, and it didn't happen the same way that Nick Cassidy wanted it to go. Yeah, and looking at Pascal Wehrlein, our champion, and his season. Not a single retirement. Was very consistent. Only had a few finishes outside of the point. So Pascal Wehrlein really ran out of trouble compared to Nick Cassidy, who ran into trouble during the season, had a retirement from Sao Paulo, one from Misano, and then he had two not so good races at Portland as well. And remember, he coming to the white flag in Portland, looked like he was going to win one of those races, and then he had the off-track excursion, and that basically, ended up hurting him really bad at the end of that, and then having a retirement today. So not good at all for Nick Cassidy. And Benny brought up a good point about Mitch Evans as well. It's really crazy that he's had a mathematical shot at the championship, for the last several seasons, but still hasn't been able to seal the deal. So I'm sure Mitch Evans is going to be using the next few months to self-reflect as well, to figure out what does he need to do to finally get over the hump and win this championship. And Joe, speaking of potential changes, I want to talk a little bit about the team principal, James Barkley. He's been the team principal of Jaguar and Formula E since they announced this program on day one. He's been in charge of building this program and turning them into a world championship contender in Formula E and the drivers and the teams championship. So given what's happened this year with Jaguar throwing away the drivers championship, do you think they need a new voice at the top?
I would say they have to definitely reconsider his ability to lead the team to that level, because they got the team championship. That is something to be proud of. But it just seems that time and time again, we've talked about how the Jaguar team, they just always seem to be missing out some way, somehow. In the past, it's been the slow start to the season. They're not getting the results. They're having issues. And then Mitch Evans has to run late in the season, but it's too late. One time, Mitch Evans, he entered the Berlin race weekend with the championship in sight. Looked like he was going to claim it. Mechanical issue. Stalled the car in the start. He was done for. So I always felt like it was just putting everything together in the right spots, putting together the perfect season. And this year, it looked like they had that. They had a great start to the year. Nick Cassidy got a win early on in the year, led the points. It just seemed like this was going to be the year to get it done. You entered the weekend with a driver first, second in the standings. Pascal Wehrlein was in the picture as well too. This could have easily been, okay, here's how we're going to make this race weekend work for the two of us and try to assure one of your drivers get the championship. I don't know where this went wrong, but I feel like maybe they need to find a team boss that could say to the two drivers, this is what we need to do. This is where we're going to get it done in the race. Because at the end of the day, it was that big mess of essentially getting the attack mode for Nick Cassidy twice, Mitch Evans just not messing around when it came to holding up the entire field. And that just compromised Nick Cassidy's race. And James was just sitting there at the end, like I mentioned earlier in the show, when James was there celebrating the team championship, but the drivers were not in the mood to do that. That really says something. And I think this is just something where they have to really consider, do we want James, or is the replacement of him the missing piece that could get us to that next level?
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be interesting to see what Jaguar does over this short off season, whether they feel like they want to change team principal at the very top, or do they want to, change around some engineers and some other parts of the team internally to make sure that that Jaguar can move forward and be as strong as they possibly can be. And we'll certainly keep an eye on any potential changes at Jaguar over the off season. And now refocusing on our Formula E World Champion this year, Pascal Wehrlein, from 2 seasons in F1 with Manor and Sauber, then moving over to Formula E full time. The title slipped away from him last year, but he finally got the job done this year. He won yesterday to claim the points lead, putting more pressure on Cassidy and Evans. While the two Jaguar drivers were radioing back and forth, arguing with the team, Wehrlein was right behind. So looking at his season as a whole, 3 wins, only 2 finishes outside of the points, and 5 podiums in total, a remarkable season of consistency. How will you remember Pascal Wehrlein's championship season, Joe?
The way I'm going to remember Pascal Wehrlein's championship season was at the very start of the season, getting that win. He had the consistency. He was there. And this year, especially where Formula E, almost all of our races were pack races, the Peloton style, just very quiet, working his way. He wasn't flashy like Nick Cassidy, getting some of the wins. He wasn't overly aggressive. He just ran smart races throughout the season, very much under the radar in Portland. He comes here where it matters the most, where London, this is the kind of racing we used to see more frequently with Formula E. The physical, bumping and banging, street racing, and that's where he really shined. He stepped up his game, got that first win, and then he stepped it up again. Really, he probably, if he really wanted to, he could have gone for the win over Oliver Rowland, but he just knew at that point he was ahead of Mitch Evans. Stay there. Championship is his. Big congratulations to Pascal Wehrlein.
Yeah, massive congratulations to Pascal Wehrlein. And I'm going to remember this as the year that Pascal Wehrlein was able to show the world the true talent that he really is. This is a guy that I've been high on in terms of his talent for a long time. In fact, after his maiden Formula One season at Manor in 2016, when Nico Rosberg announced his shock retirement, I said, you guys don't even have to do the Photoshop. You've got a picture of Pascal Wehrlein in a Mercedes fire suit. He was actually my pick to take that seat. Of course, it ended up going to Valtteri Bottas at another Mercedes-affiliated team in Williams. And Pascal spent 1 year at Sauber and then was out of Formula One, which I think is unfortunate that he didn't really get a chance in a proper F1 car to show what he could do. But he certainly has made the most of this opportunity now in Formula E. And he now can say he is an FIA world champion. So congratulations to him and a job well done. And we'll see what the future holds for him. I don't know what he's going to take the Nick de Vries route of winning a Formula E championship and then going off to a Formula One ride. But we'll see. He certainly has proven that, if there are any teams out there looking for a driver, if he's available, he should be somebody that they're calling up, because he certainly is a talent behind the wheel, and he proved it certainly this weekend, but also this entire season here. So that was great to see.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was a really fantastic season from Pascal Wehrlein. Really nice to see him to be able to seal the deal and finally become a Formula E world champion. And when he over in Formula One, I really feel like he got the raw end of the deal over there. I felt like he definitely deserved at least a third season in Formula One somewhere. But as we all know, certain things happen, and everything happens for a reason. And I think Pascal Wehrlein finding a home in Formula E has been really good for him, and he can really build a long career in this series and continue to win world championships and help his team compete for the team's championships as well. So got to tip my hat to the strong season that he has. And next year he's gonna hit it running and try to get another world championship, try to go back to back and become a 2-time Formula E world champion. And with that said, Joe, I think we'll switch over to Formula One to discuss the Hungarian Grand Prix, which was a little controversial.
Yeah, a bit controversial. That also left fans unhappy too. I feel all three big races today had some controversy, throwing in Formula E as well too. Just one of those deals where at the end of the day, the Hungarian Grand Prix, McLaren on paper 1-2 finish. Well, that's great, but they are very much mixed emotions with the teams and the driver as they're leaving, because Oscar Piastri took the lead from the start. Much better start than Lando Norris. He had the lead all day. Looked like he was on track to be that next first-time winner at the Hungarian Grand Prix. But then Lando Norris made a pit stop. Move was made to try to hold off Lewis Hamilton. But what happened when they pit Oscar Piastri? He came out behind Lando. So the team were begging Lando Norris for lap after lap, give the position back. And Lando finally did, but so clearly, coming onto a front straightaway, slowing down, allowing Oscar Piastri through. The drivers, they were not as enthusiastic as a normal team would be after a 1-2 finish. Ben, I got to ask you, when it comes to this finish, how big of a mess is this for McLaren to clean up before the next round?
That's a massive mess. I think the Ferrari comparisons in terms of strategy are apt here, although at least McLaren still came away with the 1-2. I don't think Ferrari would get that far. Usually they don't when we're joking about their strategy department. So at least they got the result. At least they got the max constructors points out of it. But just really, really unfortunate. I feel most for Oscar Piastri, because I would not, regardless of whether or not I should have had the lead or I never should have lost the lead or whatever, wouldn't want to win my first race with it involving a pass with just 3 or 4 laps to go where my teammate basically parked on the front stretch for 5 seconds and let me through. So it's, yeah, I mean, you can understand why the drivers were a little bit subdued in their enthusiasm when it came to a driver taking his first ever Formula One Grand Prix win. I know Piastri got the sprint win last year, but his first full race win. And Lando Norris getting another podium, closing in on Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship was Max's problem late there in the race. I'm very surprised Max appears to have avoided a penalty for that. We'll see. I'm sure Matt White's going to be fired up about that on Grid Tonight later this week. But certainly a lot to consider in the championship from not just the constructors' perspective, but the drivers as well. Because, listen, I hate team orders more than anybody, but if you're looking at it from Lando's perspective, I think he certainly had a right to go out and prove a point, because imagine if the wheels just completely fall off at Red Bull. Like, forget the constructors and how close the constructors is, because Sergio Perez isn't pulling his fair share and pulling his weight in that regard. Imagine if Max Verstappen just completely falls apart, Lando Norris closes the gap, but Max holds on to win the championship by 7 points or a smaller margin. I think everybody's going to point back to this race where Oscar Piastri, probably should have won, but they got shuffled around and reversed the order after the pit stop sequence, and Lando Norris was on track to win the race, was opening the gap up, had more pace than Piastri at the end of the race, yet was still asked from an insistent team perspective to give the victory to his teammate. I just think it's a very messy situation. I think for newer race fans, for maybe NASCAR fans who just recently got into Formula One, or the American fan base in particular, newer F1 fans, I think it's totally a foreign concept to see somebody let their teammate through. Again, maybe not as blatant as the Ferrari teammates in 2002 at Austria, but it certainly is not a great look for the McLaren team that they even had to be in that situation in the first place. I think they're really the only ones that you have to blame for this. So I'm thrilled for Oscar Piastri. Congratulations to him. I know it's been a long time coming, and congratulations to McLaren, because they might have the best car in the field right now. They certainly have developed some great upgrades and given their drivers cars that can contend, but they have thrown away a lot of constructors' points over the last several races because they're not used to being in this position. They've squandered their strategy a little bit, and even when they haven't squandered any constructors' points, we're still talking about their strategy department here today and how it's left them with a mess that they have to clean up. So we'll see if they can do that. But again, it's unfortunate for Piastri in particular that we're not more enthusiastic about driver's first ever F1 victory.
And one of the things you say, can they improve what they've been doing wrong when it comes to strategy? Because British Grand Prix, that was another example where the strategy department got it wrong. Kobe, in your opinion, if the team strategy department made a call as they did that inadvertently gave up second place driver to win a race after they messed up the British Grand Prix, so essentially that mess, how do they regain the driver's confidence and trust in the strategy department?
To be honest, Joe, I don't really know how they can regain the trust and confidence of the drivers after a fiasco like this. And I want to say, I think Oscar Piastri is a really great driver, a great young talent. I think he has an extremely bright future in Formula One. I think he has potential to be a future Formula One world champion, and you only get to win your first race once. And sadly, I think it's super disappointing that when we're talking about Oscar Piastri's first win, it's going to kind of be tainted in a way because of this team order. Because Lando Norris was clearly on pace to win this race, and then been told to pull over like this when you clearly have the better car, and to do this in front of this huge crowd. As you said, Joe, really demoralizing to see politics play a role in racing like this. And we know how most people feel about team orders and all of this, but to answer your question, I really don't know how this is going to regain the driver's confidence and trust, because it's definitely a really ugly look with what happened today. And I really do hate that for Oscar Piastri. So I guess the best thing they can do is just move forward, is regardless of the circumstances, just let the drivers race and figure it out from there. I really did not like seeing that team order call today. I'm sure about 90 to 95% of all the viewers out there will probably agree with that.
Yeah, team orders, and especially this was just a scenario where the team put themselves in a bad spot. Really unfortunate deal, and it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen in the next round, and how the two drivers will race each other, especially if it's those two contending for the win. Ben, let's go over towards the grid ranking, where we saw quite a bit of shuffling across the board.
Yeah, plenty of movement all over the top 10 and all throughout the entire grid ranking, and understandably so, with 6 of the 7 series running this weekend. MotoGP, the lone series with the weekend off here. Everybody getting their races in before the Olympic break, I suppose, here. But Will Brown got around Max Verstappen for third in the ranking. Chaz Mostert moved into the top 10 ahead of Brock Feeney after a strong weekend there. Yeah, sorry, there you go. Mostert 7th. Sorry there. Got a little disconnected, but he swept the weekend at Sydney Super Nights. So strong weekend for him, moving him up their ranking there. Kobe, let's talk about the championship battle in supercars. Is it back on once again, or does Mostert still need to step it up against Brown in Triple Eight?
I think the championship battle in supercars is absolutely on. These last 2 race weekends, it's been crazy to see what Walkinshaw Andretti United and Chaz Mostert, what they've been able to do together, and not just them, Ford as well. So far in the Gen 3 era of supercars, of the battle of Chevy versus Ford, Chevrolet has had the upper hand up until the last few race weekends, where it seems like now the Fords are now on top and Chevrolet is struggling to catch up. And yeah, another quiet weekend from the Red Bull Ampol Racing Triple Eight operation, which was very surprising. Will Brown, Brock Feeney once again. I know Will Brown, he didn't have a bad points week, but Brock Feeney, he was completely out to lunch in both races this weekend. He wasn't even in the conversation to win the race. So I think we've seen Triple Eight take a step back the last 2 race weekends. So that's definitely concerning for the team that's been dominating supercars for the last couple of years. But they definitely got to give a shout out to Ford for the work that they've been able to do in supercars, to keep working at it. I know they've been very frustrated because I felt like Chevrolets had the advantage, but finally, all that hard work is paying off, and they're finally taking the fight to Chevy. And Chaz Mostert is leading that charge right now. And if you look at the championship standings supercars, he's actually in between Will Brown and Brock Feeney right now. Mostert and Walkinshaw Andretti United can keep this momentum heading to the second half of the season. I truly believe they can take the fight to Will Brown and Brock Feeney for the championship. Yeah, it was definitely quite a weekend of domination for Mostert at the Sydney Motorsport Park Super Night event under the lights.
And moving on now to the World Rally Championship, it was Kalle Rovanperä who won Rally Latvia. Still needs to be added to the grid ranking. Some updates to do there, but Sebastian Ogier, still in the top 10. You see him up there in 5th place. Terry Neuville leads Oitanic in the WRC standings. Alfred Evans is 3rd. So, Joe, 4 races remain in the WRC season. Does Hyundai appear to have a driver's championship under control?
They do seem to have this driver's championship under control. Thierry Neuville, Oitanic, unless they start having disastrous races, but I feel with 4 races remaining, they're on track to doing so. It has been very interesting just seeing how this championship has developed, with those 2 drivers being the only full-time drivers to win. The Toyota drivers are winning. They're not running full-time. That's why you still see Sebastian Ogier up towards the top. Kalle Rovanperä very likely to get in the grid ranking, assuming he does more races and he just goes out there and win. So it's just been a very interesting season where you don't have the full-time drivers winning the races. But in the case of Hyundai, Oitanic, Thierry Neuville, they both have wins. They're up towards the front. Alfred Evans, winless. If he could just have some more grid races, but particularly win races, get ahead of them, that'd be great. But it's just really interesting too, Ben, because with this new point system where you got different points, where sometimes the second place driver could score more points than the winner, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to these last 4 races. But I feel confident Hyundai has to have a smile on their face, knowing that most likely one of their drivers will walk away with the championship unless they have like a Jaguar style meltdown.
And let's take a look now at the full grid ranking. So Pascal Wehrlein, your Formula E champion, is 13th. Mitch Evans got ahead of Nick Cassidy this weekend. You see them in 19th and 22nd, respectively. Next weekend, only MotoGP will be in action, the one series that didn't race this weekend. So 3 of our top 10 and each of our top 2 will be competing there. So a very light weekend coming up as we prepare for the Paris Olympic Games. In the meantime, Kobe, I'll hand it over to you as we get ready to close out the show with our one shining moments.
Yeah, that's right. Time for our great one shining moment from this racing weekend. So leave it in the comment below. What's the one thing that stood out to you from all of the racing series that were in action this weekend? And starting with you, Joe, what's your one shining moment?
My one shiny moment, I think it might be the easy one. It has to go to Pascal Wehrlein, the Formula E world champion. He had a short run in Formula One. I felt a lot of people just sort of gave up on him. He comes to Formula E. He's been somewhat successful. Then with Porsche coming in last year, he was so close to the championship, but it just did not work out. This year, he started off with a win, was very quiet, and I think a lot of folks started forgetting about him. They were focused on Nick Cassidy getting the job done, Mitch Evans having a better year, but he was just silently quiet. Portland, no frills, had a good weekend, left, comes out here, swinging that first race, getting the win, making a statement. He is now the person to beat. That put Jaguar, I think, in a tough spot. They melted down. They couldn't get the job done. Pascal Wehrlein, a world champion. Great effort for him. That Porsche team, that's my shining moment. Pascal Wehrlein claiming his first Formula E World Championship.
Well, again, I wish it didn't kind of have a cloud hanging over it, but I want to give a shout out to Oscar Piastri again. It's run very strong over the last year and a half or so with McLaren, and like I said, probably should have been in contention to win a couple of races this year already. It's just a matter of, I think, McLaren getting used to the tools that they have to go out and compete for these race victories and maybe even a championship if Red Bull starts to stumble a little bit. But well done to Piastri today. Again, wish that it could have been under slightly better circumstances with less controversy with the team order deal, but thoroughly deserving winner today nonetheless, and I'm sure that this is going to be just the first of many. He's going to win a lot more.
Yeah, those are some great shining moments from the both of you. But I'm going to give my shining moment to Kyle Larson winning the Brickyard 400. I want to say how much fun it was to watch him drive from the middle of the pack all the way to the lead, especially those closing laps and the final laps of regulation with him, Keselowski, and Blaney battling there. It certainly would have been a lot of fun to see how that would have played out during the end without the late race caution falling. But all in all, I thought it was a spectacular drive for Kyle Larson, slicing and dicing, making some really bold passes. He was really one of the few drivers who it was really just leaving it all out there to try to win the Brickyard 400 and end up paying off for him, and certainly makes up for what happened in the month of May with the rain that happened, trying to do the double. Yeah, running the Indy 500 late in the afternoon, missing the Coke 600, and being able to get in this HendrickCars.com/Papaya Orange car for the Brickyard 400, finally get to drive that scheme and put it in victory lane and kiss the brick. Certainly a special moment for Young Money. So Kyle Larson, my shining moment for this week.
A lot of shining moments. Next weekend, very light weekend, as Ben had mentioned, MotoGP only. So for all of us, especially if you're going to be watching MotoGP, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon. Don't miss any of our programming. We still have Grid tonight and tomorrow, Grid Encore, talking about Indianapolis Raceway Park, Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Xfinity Series. Of course, invest in the Grid Network. Help us stay on the air. Help us expand our coverage. Been a great 2024 so far. We've been at more tracks this year. We've been on you more coverage from the tracks. Help us continue to improve that. Call the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. They've been investing in us for a long time. You get some Grid Network stickers if you sign up as well. And be sure to share your family and friends that love motorsports right here on the Grid Network. And a friendly reminder, tomorrow, Grid Encore with Ben Schneider and Brandon Crossland. For Kobe and Ben, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time.